to today's webinar session. We're very excited to have a conversation with colleagues at Blue Cargo about per diem and detention and demurrage issues. And as you can see, today's topic is concerned your customers will question per diem charges during an economic downturn. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Alexandra Griffon, the CEO of Blue Cargo, and she will kick off today's presentation. Alexandra, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, David and Hope, and thanks everyone for joining. So as you understood, we're going to talk today mostly about per diem and demurrage. Why do they happen, and how can we mitigate that risk for your business and your customers? So especially now looking into an economic downturn, most of the customers are going to look more deeply into the per diem bills and ask for questions because everyone's trying to reduce the cost. So how can Blue Cargo in particular help you remove those old and the future invoices? So first, what's the dryage equation? So the dryage equation is that capacity is the sum of equipment, fleet, and appointment availability. So if one of those three elements isn't going right, or you can't secure one of them, then it hurts the whole thing. So basically, you invest so much in the equipment and the fleet, but then you rely on your dispatcher to figure out appointments on a manual basis and going on every terminal websites all day long. So that's the part of the equation that Blue Cargo can help make more efficient. So what are D&Ds at the origin, and what do they exist? So demurrage, detention, and per diem have been created to help manage the container life cycle originally from import to export. So there's a fee for not picking up the containers on time at the terminal, the demurrage, and another one for taking too long to return it, the per diem. And of course, today the fees both affect the container, but also the chassis. So that's why it's becoming and has become during the pandemic a heavier burden than it's ever been for all the shipping companies. So we wanted to look at what are the fees. Now, what is causing the fees? So the root cause that we've been able to analyze in the data, both for demurrage and for per diems, and then how to mitigate it. And in two different ways, how to be proactive and how to be reactive, because the bill also comes months after you've picked up or returned the container. So let's look at the import first in our cycle, and so the demurrage fees. What are the top three reasons that make demurrage fees happen? So the first reason, from what we could see in our data, is actually the hold clearance. So, and it accounts for at least 30% of the demurrage fee that happen. So making sure that you can track this information in real time, that you can spot when your container is arrived at the terminal and the hold hasn't been done before, and keeping the party responsible for the hold clearance accountable with the data to prove that. So it's the number one reason why there is demurrage on the container. The number two reason is really less known, especially if you're not a trucking company, is that even if when you go to the steamship line website and you see that the container is available for pickup, it might well not be. So this is because the terminals only work their yard by blocks, and they assign a certain number of equipment, machines, and labor on a certain day. And so sometimes your container can end up being in a closed area. So it just means that the terminal is not working at this closed area as of that particular day. And so you can't get your container, but of course it's not your fault. So this is the top two reason for demurrage fee. And this is a reason that you can mitigate if you're, and we're going to talk about the mitigation later, but if you can spot those closed areas as soon as they happen, you can ask the terminal for extra free time, because of course they don't want to invoice you for demurrage fees that you're not responsible of. So that's for the number two reasons for demurrage. And the third one is the communication, the lack, the broken, or the asynchronous communication with your dryage carrier. So making sure that you track and you help the dryage carrier pick up your containers on time, tell them your priorities, the hot containers, and when is that appointment booked or rescheduled, or is the container terminal too congested. So those are our top 3 reasons for demurrage. And I think it really helps shed a lot of light to be able to name them and be aware of those. So we're going to look at the same for per diem. So what are the reasons, the top 3 reasons based on our data on why do containers go to per diem? So the first thing I can share in terms of statistics is that we've seen that 30% of containers go to per diem, and then the average number of per diem is 3 days. So we're talking about a pretty consequent amount of per diem and containers that are not returned on time, and so the equipment can be used to make another travel by the steamship line and the shippers. So the number 1 reason that causes the per diem fees is because there is no return appointment. So everyone knows it's really difficult to book appointments. There's a lot of things happening. So you want to be, of course, on top of booking those appointments as soon as they are available, but also documenting that process, because this is one of the reasons we're going to have to go back to prove it wasn't your fault. So the second reason for per diem fees being paid is what we call the last minute change. So what's the last minute change? It's when the terminal had displayed an empty return instruction. So for example, open or dry transaction. And at the last minute, so after 4 p.m. the day before, they met their capacity. And so they changed the empty return instruction from open to closed, from open to dual, from dual transaction to closed, etc. So of course, if you've scheduled an empty container return at that time and you miss that notification, you're going to be rejected from the terminal. So that's the second reason for per diem, and one that we can completely help mitigate. The third one being chassis issues. So everyone is very familiar with chassis issues, but going to the terminal and there end up not being any chassis in the pool available, or having a mismatch of chassis. So again, something to be super on top of for your dispatching team. So now that we've talked about the origin of DNDs and the root causes and the top 3 root causes for demurrage and per diems, we can look at how to successfully avoid detention and demurrage. So the first thing to know that's very important is that terminals don't capture historical changes in container data. So if you go to a terminal website or even a steamship line website, you're going to have a current container status. So what's happening to your container right now? But as you know, the demurrage and mostly the per diem bills comes months after the container has been outgated. And so at that time, there is really no system that you can log on online and find out what happened 3 months ago or what happened to your container, or just get any historical information. So what you'll need to do to change that and make sure that when the bill comes, you can have the proofs to be able to audit that bill, you need to start tracking your containers prior to arrival so you can begin monitoring dates and timestamps for your whole container life cycle. So of course, what happens today is that there is a lot of email exchanged. And so when something happens, the only backup that you can find is going back into your emails and trying to reconstitute what happened in the past. But that's what's changing now with a system like Blue Cargo, for example, where we can really log every event and create a historical database. The goal being to be like a neutral third-party data platform where you can audit trail what happened back in the past and provide visibility and reliability to all of the actors in the supply chain. So what's happening in the legal framework? As we know, detention and demurrage are drawing a lot of attention. So what's being said exactly? So there's SB 45 Exhibit D working at a federal scale that really shows the reasons why you should not be responsible for per diem or demurrage, because there's an event that happened that is unrelated to the storage carrier being on top of his container booth. So first one, container provider diverts equipment from its original location without 48 hours notice. So this is what we referred earlier as the last minute change. So according to the UIAA and IANA, the container provider cannot change the empty return location after 4 p.m. the day before. Then the loaded container is not available for pickup upon the motor carrier's arrival. Third, terminal is too congested to accept a container. Fourth, when the motor carrier documents unsuccessful attempts to make appointments. So we're going to talk about it in the mitigation piece, because the number one advice is documentation, documentation, documentation. And fifth, receiving date changes for the booked vessel. So that also happens for export containers. So as you know, the law is changing and there is a lot of changes and improvements and scrutiny that is happening in this area. So of course, as we build the software, Blue Cargo adapts to reflect the changes in the law. And I wanted to share exactly, we also received feedback from a customer actually this morning, where they were able to have a discussion with the steamship line, and that shipping line really expressed the 4 types of dispute and proof that they are looking for. And they asked for 4 criteria. They say that they need the third-party website to be in widespread use and generally recognized as reliable and accurate. So exactly like Blue Cargo, we work with every trucking association in all the ports in the US, and of course with the FMC when they need access to the data. Second is that they need the screenshots to show the entire screen, including the URL and appointment information for all shifts. So again, we're talking about appointments and information by shift. Third, they say that the screenshot need to include an automatically generated date or timestamp, or an image of the date and time displayed on the screen. So that's also one of the criteria that the Blue Cargo screenshots meet to be completely compliant. And fourth, the screenshot submitted documents the basis for the dispute. So includes lack of appointments, chassis restrictions, dual turn requirements, or other proofs that document your inability to return or pick up the container on time. So now, how to successfully avoid the detention and the demurrage charges. So there's 2 main ways. One is proactive, and that's of course the one that we encourage as part of the operations. And one is retroactive, and making sure that we can still help after. So real-time data and notifications. So the key data were availabilities and the terminal restrictions. So all are the data that we talked about previously that help back up your case. And then you have 2 ways to utilize. So proactive is when you have this real-time tracking of the containers and you want to stop the clock and prevent the per diem or demurrage from hitting up in the future, because you have had active and live communication with steamship lines and terminals. So this stop the clock and real-time communication with both the steamship line and terminals helps prevent the problem from ever happening. And of course, as you're doing that in real time, you also want to inform the customer so they know that you're on top of it. And they also know what to expect, because the worst thing a customer could get is just unexpected fees that they haven't planned in the budget. And sometimes that even roll back to the year after. So now talking about the retroactive action. And when you have implemented the good live system in real time, then you can go back to that live system and be able to get the historical information. So exactly with a system like Blue Cargo that keeps an archive where you can go back to the archive and reconstitute the past. And of course, again, a good communication with the steamship line and the terminals, whether it's proactive or retroactive. Okay, so the size of this problem, where does it happen the most, which terminals are the most affected, and which type of containers. So first, we're just gonna look quickly at the container volume change in TUs this year, in 2022. So as you can see, the top 3 being at the beginning of the year, LA, followed by Long Beach, followed by New Jersey and New York. And right during the summer, LA and Long Beach just got to the exact same volume, and New York just surpassed them by a bit. So this volume by port also has an effect on the per diem and demurrage charges. So what we're looking at here is the average demurrage and detention charges after 14 days for a standard container in the US in 2022. So the first review that we can give here is that detention and demurrage is pretty much all over the board when we look at the top ports in the world. And then looking at the average demurrage fee per container in each of those ports, we can see that New York is actually the port with the highest amount of demurrage per container. So the average is a bit above the $3,000 per container after 14 days staying in the port. Then we're looking at Long Beach, where it's 2,700 average per container. Then it's Los Angeles, 2.6, Oakland, 2.3, Savannah, 2.2, Taiwan, 1.3, Hong Kong, 1,000, and then gets below the 1,000 with Jakarta and two ports in Germany. So really a global problem that has happened for the past 10, 15 years, but really escalated during the pandemic. And again, that is under huge scrutiny, and especially from the shippers right now, as everyone is trying to cut down costs. Now looking at the average D&D charges after 14 days for the same standard container, but this time by shipping line. So which are the shipping lines where we are seeing the highest average charge per container? So Yanmin average is at $700, so that's the top one. And then across the board, it's pretty much around 500, so close to 600 from Maersk, close to 600 from CMA CGM, and then going to 500 for HMM, ZIM, ONE, Hapag-Lloyd, and then Costco average being a little lower. So that's based on the average per diem and demurrage rate, mostly per diem, that those steamship line ask for. So now talking about the solution. So how do we help mitigate and reduce that bill? So the first piece of the solution is helping customers create a workflow to identify friction points in their container pickup and returns. So being on top of the containers as they are flowing, getting into the port, getting picked up and getting returned, and being alerted and on top of anything hurdling or making the containers being stuck for too long. So that's the live operational part. Then there is the documentation piece, which is a huge key. So provide customers with the documentation they need to avoid and mitigate past and future detention and demurrage fees. So of course, we're seeing that all of this is always based on a good communication. So good communication and mitigating the friction between the trucking company and its customer and the intermediaries that can be in between, and the trucking company with the terminal or the customer with the steamship lines, and give real-time data and visibility at the terminal. So that's what, how do we give relax and controls? That note, I will switch to a live demo of the system. And just maybe to recap on the agenda. So the demo will take a bit less than 10 minutes, and then we'll be opening for Q&A and addressing all of the questions in the chat. So welcome to Blue Cargo. As I mentioned, we're both a live system to help you make sure that you avoid any detention and demurrage from happening that wouldn't be your fault, and a retroactive system. So it's a third-party independent data tool that provides visibility, reliability, and clarity on the full container cycle and journey, and provides documentations with real screenshots and proofs from every original data source. So let's start with the retroactive piece, because this one really speaks for itself. Blue Cargo is a web platform, so really easy to use. The address is erl.bluecargo.io. ERL originally standing for empty return location because our focus is empty return locations and per diem. So returning containers on time and preventing per diem. So once you're in, and there's a 15 days free trial that you can access directly online, you can go to this feature, Fight Per Diem. And today we're available both in 4 ports, Los Angeles, Long Beach, and New York, New Jersey. So let's go with LA Long Beach for now. The only thing you need to do when you receive a bill is identify the steamship line and the container size, sending you that bill and the dates that you are paying for the late fee. And you can fill those areas. So of course, we're compatible with any steamship line, any size, and any date in the last 3 years. So we can look at today first. And basically, Blue Cargo gives you an overview of, as of right now, among the 4 terminals that are supposed to be receiving MSC containers, what are the reasons why none of them is actually open for receiving today? So this is like a one screenshot, so one single screen that summarizes information from all the terminals in one place and available by shift and in the past. So looking at this data now, what you can see is that APM, this one is pretty simple. They are nearly just closed for receiving MSC 20s as of the next few days. Then when you look at TTI, this terminal has a dual container restriction. So you can only return a container if you're picking up one at the same time, which is a pretty heavy restriction for a trucker, but a way to mitigate the yard space available for the terminal. Then you have ITS, who's also closed for receiving, and the terminal is completely closed with the gate being closed on Friday. And WBCT, so WBCT is the one terminal that is completely open for receiving. But as you know, once you know it's open for receiving, you need an appointment for each terminal in LA Long Beach. And so they have no empty appointment available anymore. So this is a live screenshot that gives you all the data you need to stop the clock. So you can download that report right now and let the shipping line aware that you can't return the container. So if you're running out of free day, you can ask for an extension. The goal is, of course, to do it in real time before the problem happens. But if a problem was still to happen, you can audit your bills. So let's say you have an MSC invoice, not for today, but 1 week ago. We can look here in this time machine and go 1 week ago and see that the same thing was happening, where no terminal had any availabilities, and the only one, TTI, had like 3 appointments from midnight to 1 a.m. So that's actually a pretty heavy restriction, especially those 3 appointments are going to be gone in a minute. So this is where we provide hour by hour information. And so you can really reconstitute everything that happened. And if you look at 9 a.m., of course, the 3 appointments left were gone. So this is giving you the full information across the board. And so I showed you a screenshot from last week, but as I mentioned, we can go up to 3 years ago. So we can find what was happening this summer for MSC in July, because as of right now in LA, MSCs are not able to return anywhere. So that's something to be super aware of. But let's look at July. In July, across the 5 terminals that should be accepting the MSCs, they all had restrictions. So the best one are still TTI and APMT on that day, because they had appointments available. As you can see on the Friday shift 2 and Saturday shift 1, you can see the number of appointments available at the terminal that display this information, which is obviously very important when you're scheduling your moves for several containers as a trucking company. But still, they were all on that dual transaction restriction. So you can only use those appointments if you're picking up a container at the same time. So this is where we help you get all this documentation in the format and template that is mandatory and asked for to be a legitimate proof. So when you click here on finalize your report, you can share this information with everyone in your team and download an automated report. So as I've clicked on this, we got our documentation created that generates a report and give the information for each of those terminals. So as an overview, but also terminal specific. And as I mentioned earlier, it's part of the requirement with the exact timestamp. So you can prove this is the official screenshot from the website. So again, available for every terminal, every shipping line in our 4 ports for the past 3 years. So that was the example in LA Long Beach. If you have the case in New York, New Jersey, it works the same. You just enter New York, New Jersey here, and you can go to your screenshots. And you're going to see that now the terminals are automatically going to adapt to the terminals that we have operating in the New York, New Jersey area. And of course, we only show the terminals that take a specific shipping line and not all of them. And just as an FYI, we're opening Oakland and Seattle by the end of the year, and then Savannah in February, and national rollout before the next 12 months. So Blue Cargo is going to be available absolutely everywhere in the US first. So that's the retroactive way to fight the per diem. But of course, what we want to insist on is the proactive way. So when you want to go to the proactive way and making sure you don't have those bills to audit 3 months down the road and have to use this system of auditing the bills, we help move the containers in real time every day in those ports that I mentioned. So for example, if we look at the gated out containers that you may have, for those gated out containers, you can see the import information. So when was this container picked up? And then you can see what are the appointments available, and we help you book the most relevant for your operation. So this is where the appointments are available. So if I take an example in LA Long Beach, you can see the CMA container arrived at LBCT. First appointment also on Thursday. So the time here is in PST. And you can see all the appointments available to return your container. So that's to help return the container as soon as possible, because our goal is to unstick containers and make sure they are flowing as fast as possible. But of course, sometimes there are no appointments available. So this is the example here for this MSC container, as we've talked about, because MSCs are really tough, have been really tough to return in LA Long Beach the last few days, and apparently in New York, New Jersey too. So this is where you can track the time that your container has been out in this column called detention period. So when you see that the containers have been out for 47 days and there is no appointment available, it's not your fault, you can't return that container. So we automatically generate the per diem report. So the same one I've showed, but automatically generated for that specific container and for those specific days. So this is the most automated way to stop the clock and start the communication thread between all of your partners, the steamship line, the terminal, and the customer, of course. So that's to help return the containers live. And of course, once the container has been returned, we still keep track of everything historically. So once the transaction is terminated, you can see when was the container picked up and when was the container returned, but you still have this track of the detention period and of the per diem report as a PDF that you can always download and forward to make sure that whatever happens in the future and whatever bill you receive, you can go back to the past and find the right information. So that's the main pieces of the demonstration. Of course, there's a lot more on the operational side on Blue Cargo, but really wanted to focus on the demurrage and the detention for today, and invite you to start a free trial. If that was interesting, you just go to bluecargo.io and you will see try the 15 days free. And so back to our presentation, and would be super happy to open the Q&A and start answering it. And also introducing Aurélie and my team who can also help with the specific questions that we'll have.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. I know we had a little bit of we lost you there for little disconnect here and there, but I think I hope everyone had an opportunity to understand what you were doing. And again, if there are any questions, please follow up with Alexandra and Aurélie, and they can certainly walk you through on a demonstration as well. But I have a few questions, so I'm just going to go ahead and start, Alexandra, if you don't mind. First question is, how can you tell if your container is in a closed area, assuming the steamship line shows the container as available?
Yeah, great question. So Blue Cargo is both integrated with the steamship lines, but mostly with all the terminals. And this is where the discrepancy happens, is that the shipping lines don't show the same thing as the terminal. And so if you're a shipper or an end customer, you think it's available, whereas it's actually not. So our main piece of intelligence is that we reconciliate all of the data, both from the shipping lines and the terminal, to tell what the real data is. And really often when it's about a container being in the terminal, we consider the terminal as the source of truth. So that's where it comes from. And short answer, integrating with all the terminals in all the ports that we operate at.
Next, we have a question. The averages for the detention and demurrage, are they the total average by port or the median?
So, Aurélie, do you know about the specific numbers to address the second question?
Yeah, so basically the average that we saw in the case study was by port. So
Yeah.
we saw the average of 14 days. The average per diem bill per standard containers for an average of 14 days. And that's per port. So the port of New York, New Jersey now, and on number one, and then Los Angeles, Long Beach, and then Savannah, etc.
Yeah, and I think it's the average. It's not by days. The average by container.
Very good, thank you. Will Blue Cargo eventually have the same tracking and options for rail containers?
Yeah, I love that question. Yes, that's definitely in our roadmap. So our roadmap in the next 12 months, so by November next year, is to be in every marine terminal in the United States and Canada. And a bit before that, we'll be seriously investigating in the rail area. We know there's huge roadblocks too, but there's even less visibility given by the rail terminals. So we'll have to figure out how to get all the data, but we know it's a major problem. And also we want to be able to identify when the containers here, even in the maritime ports, gate out and go to the rail, so they're not expected to be brought back empty. So all of those cases are areas that we're working on and investigating. And one thing I didn't mention about Blue Cargo, but the company is a bit more than 3 years old, so we're working like very heavily with our first users and customers and making sure all the needs and questions are prioritized. So as you work with us, we're really able to be flexible on the roadmap and adapt to whatever is the most urgent problem. So yeah, really happy to investigate in it together.
The next question is, can you pay online through Blue Cargo for charges?
No, so today you can't pay the charges online on Blue Cargo. You have to go to either, depending on the charge, either to the steamship line or the terminal website. What we're going to do really soon is we are going to integrate a hyperlink so that we can redirect you to the right payment portal, because we know it's very confusing, and especially when it's a shipper that is asked to pay the fee. And when it comes to demurrage, you need to pay them as quick as possible, because every day you're not paying them, you incur demurrage for the day after. So we're going to integrate quick links so that we redirect to the right portal in a very easy way, and you can still use one single tool, Blue Cargo, to redirect you to all the right ones just for payment.
In your opinion, why do you think the steamship lines take so long to respond to per diem charge disputes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what I've seen is that pretty often the office that manages the disputes is offshore and very manual and understaffed. So I think even the shipping lines could benefit from having like the visibility and the data at the tip of their hands and empower their operators. But I think it's the resources and the size of the offices that are allocated to that subject is one of the area of the answer.
There's a question about what is Blue Cargo? What is the service fee per month?
Yeah, so the fee is by volume. So it completely depends on the volume of containers that you put on the platform. Everything is accessible online. So again, if you put erl.bluecargo.io, you can simulate, enter your volume, and it will tell you the pricing, either month to month or year to year. So our idea is to really be able to adapt to any size of company. We know that especially the smallest companies are the ones that have had the less visibility, or even that are relying on more intermediaries to move their freight. So our pricing is completely adapting to volume, and everything is available online.
Another question is, do you have true terminal operating system integration?
Yeah, so it depends of the terminals. So for example, APM terminals, we are one of their first partners in integrating their API in the ports and actually even helping them with the requirements on what to put on the API. And I don't know if we've done that communication yet, but we're going to communicate on this partnership. Other terminals, we also use their APIs. Terminals that have less technology or less technology available, we're still in discussion. So the answer is really, it depends. Our integration depends on the terminal, but what matters is that at the end of the day, we provide the same level of data and refreshness and accuracy, whatever data source we grab. So if we're not sure, we just like, don't sell this data source or don't overpromise.
Another question is, do you work with steamship lines to come up with a list of backup documentation they require to consider when they are waiving per diem fees?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So today we adapted to their standards. So when I was listing a bit earlier what they ask for, so a third party, reliable and generally widespread, the appointment information by shift, the timestamp included on the screenshot, and the proof, like the real screenshot from the terminal website showing the dual turn requirement or the chassis restriction, or the real screenshot from the appointment website showing the lack of appointment. So early on, we just adapted to the format that they asked for. And we compiled all those proofs together, made sure they were working, and got them approved working with the FMC. So now when they change their requirements, we adapt our screenshots. And in the future, we would really love, and it's part of our vision, to be able to create a standard and something that is widespreadly accepted, so that you don't have to provide a different standard for every shipping line, because some of them now have forms that you need to fill. Some of them ask for different information. I know MSC has a portal, probably Hapag-Lloyd too. So yeah, we're acting strongly on trying to establish a standard for the industry.
That's great. Another question, how are the containers loaded in the system?
Yeah. So it's very flexible, again, because we are able to work with any size of companies. So it can start from the most manual way, where you copy paste a list of containers into the system, a bit better where you download a CSV or an Excel into the system. Then a bit better, actually pretty good, we do like email forwarding from your systems. So we set up, and it takes like less than 5 minutes. We set up an automated email forwarding so that your systems feeds ours in a real-time basis. And when your team logs in the morning, everything is here. And then last level, we work on any kind of data transfer. So it can be a flat file, it can be an API, depending on the system that you use. But from any system, we're able to have a redirection that sends containers to Blue Cargo. So those are kind of the 4 steps, depending on the level of technology that the company uses. And of course, we want to minimize the manual work, and we want to make sure that we are providing a service that enhances the journey on every container. Because if you put 20% of your containers on Blue Cargo, even 90% of your containers, but the one ending up having the most per diem is in the 10% that you didn't enter in the system, then you can't access, especially for demurrage, the historical information because you didn't enter the containers on time. So we're trying to make it as facilitated as possible to have automated transfers of containers. So you log in the morning, everything is here, and you can sleep on your 2 years because 4 months later, you can go back to the documentation and everything was recorded live.
We have time for two last questions. How often is your system updating regarding the steamship line terminal systems?
Yeah, so it depends of the data. So if you've seen the system and what we call the container management system, there's like 20 different columns with all the data checks that need to happen. So depending on those data, we go as fast as every 5 minutes. So every 5 minutes is our appointment refresh rate. So you can check the latest available appointments and the number of appointments available every 5 minutes, because we know that data is like super live and changing every minute actually. And then we go, the slowest is 6 hours. And that's for the gate transaction. So gated in and gated out. So overall answer, less than 6 hours on every data point.
And the final question is, do you have an API available?
Yeah, so we have those integrations that I mentioned to get the containers from the existing systems into Blue Cargo. So that's the data in. When it comes to the data out, so sending back our information to another system, we are beta testing an API product. So it's not a product publicly available on the market yet, but if you want to be one of the beta testers and have this information handy first, we can include that in the beginning of next year.
That's great. Well, I thank you both very much for the presentation today. And I thank everyone who who joined us today. I hope it was an informative session for everyone. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to either reach out to Ayanna and we'll pass them along to Alexandra, or you can reach out to Alexandra as well with her contact information at Blue Cargo. Thank you all very much and have a great afternoon. And thank you again for joining us.